Well, hello, free people of the Rocky Mountain region, and welcome to this Free State Colorado video. Today, I'm joined by Kathleen Chandler. Kathleen is a fourth generation Colorado native, director of the Citizens Involvement Project at the Independence Institute, and a candidate for RTD Board at District F. Well, Kathleen, I hope you are well, and thank you for joining me today.
Well, welcome, Brandon. This is great honor for me to be invited. I appreciate it.
Well, there's a lot to talk about with RTD. It's a massive government here in Colorado. There's thousands, millions of people who use it. There's definitely some issues, so I'm really excited to get some information out there to the people and kind of give them some background on RTD and actually kind of this biggest secret we want to touch on.
Yeah, well, I can tell you the biggest secret, I think, right now is that it's a $1.2 billion yearly budget. People do not realize that RTD is the third largest, arguably the third largest budget in the state of Colorado. And it's bigger actually than the Colorado Department of Transportation, which deals with all four corners. This particular agency only deals with 8 counties. And so people don't understand how big RTD is. And so they just assume that, buses and trains are there, and they have no idea that their tax dollars are really, unfortunately, I feel, being wasted.
Wow, I had no idea. I knew it was a big government, right? Big agency, but it's bigger than CDOT. You think of the highways, the roads, all these issues that people are complaining about nonstop of these potholes and all the problems that we deal with every day on our way to work. And you're telling me RTD's got a bigger budget than CDOT is responsible for maintaining our roads?
It is. And what's really crazy is not only that, but the RTD doesn't fill any of those potholes. So all we deal with is the bus and the transit service. So if you've got a pothole, you can't complain to the RTD, you have to complain to CDOT. And it's just the way that they have delineated the different agencies. And so it's crazy. And most people don't realize that if you live out on the Eastern Plains, of course, you have no control over of RTD, and you don't even pay the tax, which is good. But yet there's still this drain that's happening on the Front Range that's being this $1.2 billion budget.
Wow. Well, I'd love to give people a little bit of background about RTD here. It was created in 1969 by actually the Colorado General Assembly. So our state legislature created it. And, I think they did some things right, maybe not everything right, as we might get into here. But in 1973, voters approved a 0.5% sales tax initiative to finance this 1.56 billion multimodal transit system. And RTD acquired privately owned bus companies, improved service frequencies, expanded routes in numerous counties throughout the metro area with 35 million rides annually in 1976. So that's really interesting. I have to wonder about those privately owned bus companies and if they were more efficient or more cost effective. You'd have to imagine they were back then, I would think.
Well, and think about it. That was $1973 was that $1.56 billion multimodal transit system. And think about how much that is today. That's a 1.2 yearly budget. That was how they started getting all of that stuff put together. So now it's completely ballooned out of control.
Wow, yeah, definitely a lot of money tied up in RTD, that's for sure. Now, Kathleen, this was from your website. If you want to walk us through this, I know you've already mentioned that's the fourth largest budget in the state, but I think that's something that should kind of shock people when you think of our Department of Education, Health and Human or Public Health, these different agencies out there, CDOT, like we said, but RTD is just one of the top ones. So if you want to kind of walk us through this graphic from your website.
Yeah, absolutely. As mentioned, ridership keeps continuing to fall, and there's this really significant ridership that was before the pandemic and has absolutely decreased since the pandemic, and it's never recovered. It's never recovered because there's a sense of safety issues that are going on within RTD. You don't write it because it's unsafe. It's unsafe because you don't write it. So there's this circular argument. So we need to break that argument on making it more safe so people will return. But they also don't write it because, frankly, it's unreliable. And so it's just getting out of control. The budget was $1.2 billion. That's at least a 6% increase from the last year. Every year, I don't know many people that are getting a 6% pay raise in their budgets every year. The labor, the fuel, all of their benefits. RTD is a union shop, so that's a real difficult situation as well. And, they're just not doing a good job. They're not being efficient. I kind of used my experience for being on the HOA. I was the president of my HOA for several years. And within that HOA, we always set aside money for, fixing the fencing. And we had these contingency plans. Well, RTD hasn't done a very good job of doing that. So when the rail lines were going kaput this year, they didn't have really the time, the money, or any of the maintenance set aside to fix them. So when you don't do that, you have a crisis, right? You're causing yourself into a crisis to try to fix it. And that's where the unreliability is. If you have to ride the light rail and you have to call your employer and say, well, the train is 30 minutes late, is your employer really going to be happy to know that you're at least 30 minutes, if not more, late? No. So the reliability and the way that they're fixing them is not helping the average ridership either, keeping that increase or even maintaining what it was before the pandemic. So the answer is really not to keep increasing taxes, but to cut their expenses, cut the cost of RTD to the taxpayer. It's not really a revenue problem. It's the way that they're spending that money. That's the problem.
Well, yeah, and I have to think, RTD, if they did a very little, if they did a small thing and did it really well, that'd be one thing. But it seems like they have these big dreams, right? These pipe dreams, I would even say. They just want to expand. Now they want to have this front range rail system. I know it's not entirely the RTD people involved with that, but nonetheless, there's all these plans for expansion. We saw with the fast tracks and the light rail and all these different types of things over the years. And it's like they can't get the basics down. You would think, if you're a private company or if you're really trying to be a good steward of this taxpayer money, do something simple, but do it really well. And then maybe see if you can scale up from there. But that doesn't seem to be the case.
And that's exactly the problem with RTD. If you are a transit center, that is your mandate, is to transport people from point A to point B, do that well. Don't do all of these other things. And especially don't have the inflexibility that the rail system is offering. The rail system is a fixed asset. It only goes from point A to point B. What I'm looking for is that flexibility in mobility, which allows buses and other modes of transportation for those transit dependent people to get from point A to point B in a timely manner.
Yeah, hey, that makes sense to me for sure. And you've already touched on some of the issues that RTDs had, but you got to think if you have a small child, you don't want them taking RTD alone. I mean, especially through Metro Denver, all these stories we hear about crime. I mean, these stories are within the last year. It's not like I had to search for decades to find this. I mean, you're talking about hundreds of RTD operators getting exposed to drugs. I mean, that's almost between April and August, 200 people had to stop working on RTD because of the drugs. Unfortunately, we hear about these stories of people getting stabbed or shot or other bad situations on the light rail on the buses. So it's no wonder that people are maybe cautious or skeptical of this mass transit system we have.
Yeah, when my son, he's 25 now, when he was younger, he and my mother would catch the light rail and I would meet them because he had a violin lesson and I would catch him at Yale and I-25 off the light rail. I would never let my mother and my son take the light rail today. It's, to conveniently meet so that I could take him to his violin lesson. That's what RTD should be providing, right? Is those necessary things for a single mom at the time to get from point A to point B to help the community, help workers get to where they need to be. That is what it was designed for. That is absolutely not the service it's delivering today. The big thing it's delivering today, unfortunately, is a place where you can do drugs, where crime is happening. It's a place where, as a worker, you're not safe. And why would you as a citizen then turn around and try to ride the light rail? No wonder it's decreasing in their ridership.
Well, and I remember when I lived in Golden and, I want to go down to a hockey game down in Denver, right, to see the Colorado Avalanche play. And, I took the light rail a couple times, but by the time I got down there, I mean, it was over an hour. It was a less than a 20-minute car ride. So it's like, if you have the time, you can make it work, but it just seems so inconvenient for most people in a lot of these different situations where I mean and this was not I could walk right out my apartment. I mean it wasn't very far, and of course then the train would drop me off right at the Pepsi Center, so it was really easy to do it. But it was like, my goodness, am I really going to spend another 2 hours driving or 2 hours on the train, excuse me, when I could take 40 minutes to drive?
Well, and some of the people have been complaining recently because the unreliability of it is they've actually missed the opening act of a certain think the trains are running so slow, or they're so infrequent that they've mistimed it. And if you paid, a couple of $100 for a ticket to something and you miss part of it, I've heard people that used to have tickets to the Performing Arts Center. Well, if you come late to those tickets successive times, they actually will pull your membership and say you can't come here anymore because you're late. Well, would you do that? Would you risk that? No, I wouldn't. I would take an Uber. I would take a Lyft. And I think that's the flexibility that we need in RTD. It's totally inflexible, and it's absolutely not giving you the service you deserve and paying for it.
Well, and as you said too, this is an article. I mean, just from a week, just a recent article a couple weeks ago. RTD's wrapped up downtown light rail construction, but train service is still weeks away. I mean, this was definitely one of the big stories with RTD this summer. People, like you said, missing their events, being late to work, not being able to rely on RTD on the light rail specifically. And here we go. I mean, it's been taking months, and it's still going to be weeks before they can actually get it running.
Yeah, and you're actually harming the most vulnerable people, those that are actually transit dependent. I mean, it's one thing to quote, have somebody miss their tickets for a $500 opera ticket. That's bad enough, but it's worse if you have somebody who's fired from a really good job that they had spent a year trying to get, and they've lost that job because they, were late 2 or 3 times in a row because of the RTD system. That is the population that we, as compassionate conservatives, need to be wary of, and rightly so. We should be protecting those that are transit dependent.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. That's what it's there for. RTD is not going away, right? I mean, this
Right.
this $1 billion budgets, and no matter what happens politically, RTD is here to stay. So we might as well have it the best, most efficient, best managed type of system we can have that actually meets the needs of the people that rely on it. I mean, that makes sense to me.
Absolutely. Yeah, the rail system, because it is inflexible, unfortunately, it is not going away. They've spent billions of dollars, collecting the land and putting down the rails. But let's limit that, and now let's go back to the flexibility that brings with bus service, because this whole light rail all the way up north and maybe all the way down south, again, it's really not servicing the people that need it the most. So I would really hope that as a voter, as a citizen out there, that you would look to see that really RTD needs to deliver service. And these light rail systems are not delivering service.
Oh, well said. So that kind of leads us into the secret, as I call it here. The biggest secret with RTD, I would say, is that RTD is one of the few American transit agencies that's actually run by elected officials, not appointees, which means the voters, which means the people, the taxpayers, the voters, the citizens. We have control over RTD in this direction it can go. So all these problems we've discussed, they don't have to be that way. Things do not have to be this way. Service does not have to get worse. Crime does not have to continue to go up. People can get involved if the voters show up. And thank you, Kathleen, for running this year. I know it's not the most glamorous position out there. So thank you for your service in terms of jumping in the race and standing up and getting involved in this process and actually going to try and do something about these problems.
Well, thank you. Yes, it is. It's a really great honor, actually, to represent the citizens of Aurora for this district that I am in. But I also would like to say that Governor Polis is actually trying to change the makeup of the board of RTD. He floated a bill last year that actually was killed in committee that would have taken away the elected positions within RTD and made them fewer, and then had appointed members from the board. We have this side of the political spectrum that's always yelling about democracy, democracy. We need to be involved in democracy. And then you have a governor who's taking away the vote of the people for a very vital function within the RTD, within transit, within our community that services the most vulnerable people, those that are transit dependent. And he wants to take away your vote. So I would hope that we would increase the number of people that are participating in this particular election to show the governor that people really do care about RTD and the fact that they have the say over who represents them.
Definitely. Yeah. I remember that legislation and all the outcry and uproar. Everybody from the Denver City Council to, taxpayer guardians to different people across the state did not like this idea of removing an elected position and turning it into an appointed position. I mean, definitely anti-democratic for sure.
Yeah, and that seems to be, unfortunately, sometimes the other side that's not as freedom oriented. We're over here yelling, we need more participation, and sometimes they yell, "Oh no, no, we're the experts. We know, you as a citizen." Well, no, you don't know what I want as a citizen, and you're certainly not responsive to my needs, much less to what my tax needs are or what my tax burden could be or should be.
Yes, 100%. And so I know
Yeah.
there's probably some people watching this who's, a lot of people who watch this or, follow my stuff, they're pretty well informed. So they might be saying, Brandon, what are you talking about? It's a secret. I vote on RTD elections all the time, every time they come up. But I gotta say, it's a secret for half the population. So I think it's really fair to say that because you see some of these races where you have 48% turnout. 49% turnout. And this is 2 years ago. So there's a lot of times when half the voting registered voters in that community are not voting um, at all. So, and sometimes, like you said, there's not even that many people running for these positions.
In fact, there are several races this year. If you look at the different races, I forget, I think it's in RTD District A, there's only one candidate. So not only is 40%, 48% of the voters voting, but they're not going to have any choice at all. Either you vote for the guy or not, he's going to get there. And so, in my race, I am contested, which is exciting because I think iron sharpens iron, right? If the two of us can come together and have a good discussion, it makes not only us better as candidates and as representatives, but it also helps to inform the public better. If you don't have any additional those that are running against each other, it really doesn't look good. Not only for those that are representing, but even for the system itself, it makes it look like no one cares. And that's not true. We should care about a $1.2 billion industry that is supposed to be servicing the most transit dependent people in our community.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, $1 billion agency, half the people aren't even voting. Half these seats, or maybe more or less, depending on the year, are not even people aren't even running for this position. So I would say it's fair to say that this is a secret. The secret is the citizen involvement, and the citizen involvement can actually have an impact. We can kind of turn a lot of these problems around, but it takes people like you, Kathleen, and other people hopefully paying attention who are going to do that research, learn about the candidates, and either run for office or vote and make sure they're voting smart come this November.
Well, and I think that's the secret really is if you ever have thought about getting involved, maybe RTD is a good entry point because people aren't necessarily paying attention. And if you have a passion for service to your community, a passion for transit, a passion about maybe holding elected officials accountable for a budget, then maybe RTD is a great place for you to at least get your feet wet. Go to an RTD meeting, learn who's your representative, come and shake their hand, go down and see their offices, and then maybe one day you'll have an opportunity to run as well. I mean, we'd love to see more candidates for sure.
Oh, definitely. Let's look at the map here. So this is the different districts for RTD here across the Denver metro area, all the way down to from Castle Rock up to Longmont, pretty much there. So kind of give people an idea of what of the this area that's serviced by RTD. And I got to say too, I'm good friends with Natalie Menton. We've done a lot of videos in the past, and she talks about her experience on the RTD board. And I mean, some real wins that she had. I mean, stopping this excessive taxpayer spending, making sure that the press had access to these open meetings and that there was good transparency with what was going on and really just trying to hold these people accountable for such a massive department that so few people pay attention to. Pro liberty candidates or pro liberty individuals, I mean, they have a real opportunity here to get in there and really do some good work.
Absolutely. And in fact, one of the big issues that's going to be before you as a voter, if you live in the RTD district area, is the detabering. The detabering of RTD is being on the ballot, is going to be on the ballot this coming fall. So we need to, as citizens, go, hey, wait a minute, you're already getting $1.2 billion. And there's a tax from 1992 that was set to sunset that paid off the bonds for the T-Rex project. They want to keep that money. Well, okay, but what are you going to use the money for? And that's what I'm objecting to. You need to make the case. You can't just ask to keep the money and have no plan. And I think we as citizens need to understand that we hold them accountable for that plan. So I'm advocating too a no vote on the detabering aspect of the RTD district this coming fall, not because I'm against raising taxes necessarily, but I am against raising taxes for taxes' sake. Like, I want there to be a plan, and they've come up with no plan, and they've given us no justification for that additional money that they're going to keep. This district is very large. It covers a very large area, and it covers a large taxing entity. And so I think it's really important that we hold them accountable.
Definitely. I'm really glad you brought that up about the detabering. I think that's going to be one of the big issues this year that people really need to be informed on because it's not being talked a lot, not about yet. But of course, we're still some time out from the election. But I wanted to show people a map of your district here. So you said it's this Aurora area, really. So pretty much east of 225 there, up till about E470 is
C470.
kind of
Yeah.
okay.
E470. And what's really sad is I live a little bit closer to the Aurora Reservoir over in that area, but the closest bus stop to my house is 2.5 miles. So I have people that have to figure out how to get from my community to the bus stop, to get to the bus stop, to get to the rail line, to get to where they need to go. And so you talked earlier about it being an hour. Well, for my community, it's even longer. And so they're building a new VA facility, a little clinic near my house. And I'm advocating, look, you're building a VA center. We need to have bus service for that VA center. I spoke to a gentleman while I was walking my district, and he lives in my neighborhood. He's a parole officer. And he says the biggest problem in our community is many parolees don't have a valid driver's license, don't have a car, and they're having trouble getting to their parole hearing meetings because there's no transit in our area. So you have communities that are paying the tax and are not receiving the service at all to get to where they need to go.
That's a really good point. Yeah, I mean, everybody in the Denver metro area is paying into RTD one way or another. And like you said, there's a lot of areas where there's no service, and some of the people who need it the most aren't able to access these services, but they're still being taxed on it. I mean, if there's ever a need for a mass transit or a bus type system, it seems, a VA hospital or VA clinic, some of these different facilities like that, those are probably the places where you'd want to put a bus stop.
Yeah, absolutely. And see how spotty my poor district is? It's only the blue areas right there. So it's kind of odd. And so for me to actually try to talk to people about RTD, it's been difficult because if you go on certain areas, like even across the street in some of the areas, you're not in the district anymore. It's really an odd district. Most of them are contiguous. Mine is not. And I
Hmm.
think it's because a lot of communities out in my area, I'm out east, are newer. And I'm not sure that RTD has swept them into their taxing district yet. So if you live in a newer community, you might want to make sure that you're talking to the people. Whether you want to be in it or not is up to you, but you need to decide. Don't let these people either sweep you in by sheer just, sweeping you in because they want more tax base. Be careful.
Yeah, that's a really good point, especially with all this new development in that area. For sure, it's growing like crazy. So yeah, it's something people need to watch for years to come. That's for sure.
Absolutely.
Well, and I'm glad you brought up the detabering. I have a couple articles here at the end, just because if people need to realize why this matters so much. There's two big things. This is a great article from Sean Boyd back in February of this year. Two Colorado counties, that was Jeff and Arapahoe, but also RTD got caught using taxpayer dollars on political consultants to generate more tax dollars. I mean, it's absolutely outrageous. If people out there are tired of this type of thing, we're tired of this runaway government and these politicians trying to do everything they can to pick our pockets and take more money out of our paychecks that we work so hard for, then this right here is a good enough reason to get involved in your RTD election this year. Find out who your candidates are. Hopefully you got somebody great like Kathleen running, but definitely people get involved, pay attention. RTD is one of those things we can't afford to miss out on.
Absolutely. It really made me quite angry. I went down to the RTD board and testified against the detabering measure. It passed unanimously, and I was like, but why? Again, they're spending money. They did a survey. They spent money, our money, to say whether or not they should put this detabering measure out, and then they got mixed feedback, but it was good enough for them to pay a consultant more tax money to try to bilk us for more tax money. It's ridiculous. And they've done that, as you mentioned. Arapahoe County is doing that. Jefferson County is doing that. And I'm sure there's other small groups within the different taxing agencies. Be careful of those small taxing agencies like your metro district, your fire district. Those actually have the opportunity to de-taber as well. That's where you're going to you're going to have less than that 48% participate in those kinds of elections. And that's sad, very sad.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned the special districts and some of these local taxing districts because, that's one of the big themes I keep trying to hit on is, local matters more than national politics. You have such a huge impact, and I know with all your work you do at the Independence Institute, it's really those local races, those local kind of offices that we can actually have an impact. We can actually stand up and do something about. People get so frustrated because they see what's going on in Washington, D.C. or even in Denver at the state capitol, and they feel like they can't do anything about it. But when you're talking about a city council, you're talking about a special district. I mean, there's so few people paying attention. A well-organized group of two or three people can actually make a huge impact.
Absolutely. I tell people all the time, you cannot go and, shake the hand of the president of the United States, whoever that is. But you can go down and shake the hand of your mayor. You can go testify at your local school district. You can come to an RTD meeting. These are things that you can actually show up in person and have a huge impact on.
Well said, well said. And yeah, here's an article here just from September 6th, so just very recent, where just what you mentioned, RTD asks voters for permanent exemption from Tabor refunds.
Yeah.
So yeah, if and of course that little line there, quote, if voters don't take action, there will be a significant cut to funding after next year. Of course, they want to scare people and say, hey, listen, it's only because we don't have enough money. $1 billion isn't enough. We need more and more of your tax money, and we'll finally get it right eventually. And it's there's good reason for the voters to be skeptical of that, I'd say.
Well, and what's really silly is less than 5% of RTD's revenue is actually paid for through fares. So part of it is that they offer the RTD services for free all the time. And that's their summer program. Well, if something is free, it becomes of no value, right? There has to be some buy-in from the actual public. So, part of it is, yeah, there's a significant cut to your funding, but if you would just actually charge for it, then it would actually bring in a little bit more revenue. So 95% of the RTE budget is not paid by riders. It's paid by taxpayers that probably never ride RTD.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, talk about unsustainable, right? It'd be one thing if you say, hey, like a company like Uber or Lyft or, even the taxi cab companies, they have to make money based on the fares that and the people using the service. Using the service, those are the people who pay for it. And it doesn't work that way when you get a government entity like RTD, unfortunately.
Yeah. What other agency can you get paid to do nothing or, use money from somebody who's not even using your service? I mean, it's ridiculous.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
So I definitely encourage people to check out your website. You have some great information on there. It's very well done. Chandler for RTD.com. Definitely check that out. See if you're in Kathleen's district. And if you're not, find out who's running for election if that district's up this year, or find out even just who represents you and get involved, start paying attention. If you're in the Denver metro area, you definitely need to be paying attention to RTD. And yeah, definitely encourage people to check out your website.
Yes, in fact, I appreciate that because I'm always looking for knockers and walkers because the district is quite large. So if you have a little spare time and would like to maybe even canvass your own neighborhood, this is a nonpartisan election. So I just want to make sure everyone understands that because transit, in my mind, is nonpartisan. I mean, it's all about making sure that transit dependent people get the service that they're paying for, that we as taxpayers are paying for, and that as a compassionate society, we're helping the most vulnerable. And if it helps me get to a Broncos game, so be it. That's even better.
Nice. Awesome. I love it. Just one last slide I wanted to share just because it was so good on your website here, this graphic that you have. And I think this is, something people can take away. You've already talked about it a little bit, but just this idea of, you get the flexibility with buses, right? You get so much more, it seems bang for your buck with buses as opposed to this light rail. The flexibility, the mobility, the ability to meet the needs of people who most need these services. So I just at least wanted to touch on that one last time here before we end it.
Yeah, my two main things I want to talk about on RTD is crime and flexibility in within mobility. like that whole idea that you need that flexibility of a bus. If the bus is got into really snarly traffic, they can reroute it. It can go around things. You know, a rail line, if the rail line is down, the entire system is down. So that is not flexible at all. You know, if there's a new area that's being built out east where my community is, you can add a bus really simply. It's a quick fix to those kinds of problems. Those kinds of, as we would say, management decisions that need to be happening on the fly. It's just not like any other business. You need to go and service the people that are paying the money, that are needing the service. That's what any other business would do. That's what RTD needs to do.
Awesome, Kathleen. I'm fired up. I'm ready to get involved in RTD elections. So thank you so much for your passion and your knowledge. I mean, has been very interesting conversation, and I hope people, get involved. It's enough. We all know the problems in our society and our state, but now it's time to do something about it. And this is a great way to do it. So thank you so much, Kathleen. Any parting words?
Just go to my website, of course, which is chandlerforrtd.com. And I would love to maybe meet you for coffee, hear what your ideas are about transit. But more importantly, I would like you just to talk to your neighbors. Like go over to your neighbor and say, hey, what do you think about the transit in our area? Find out where your closest bus stop is. Maybe ride it once or twice just to see what it's like. But mostly just get involved. As you said, vote and know who you're voting for.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for your time. If there's any updates or any new information, please let us know. But until then, take care.
Thank you so much, Brandon. I appreciate the time and all of the effort that you've done over the years for helping Colorado stay free.
Awesome. Thanks, Kathleen.